Let me start by saying this is a very true story from my childhood, and if you visit the big library in Nottingham City Centre and check out the newspaper records, you will actually find information about the events detailed here. This story takes place around 15 or 16 years ago. I was just 7 years old, and my cousin Dale was around 9, maybe 10. He was staying with me while my mother was away looking after a sick relative. Since I was only a child, I didn't have many toys, and my Sega Genesis was busted, and so we didn't have much things to do that were entertaining. Our days consisted of watching cartoons on our cable television, followed by Dale telling me scary ghost stories. It turned night time. My mother, sympathising with us and wanting us to do something more active, decided to purchase a pair of walkie-talkies for us to play with. We had fun with them, journeying to a neighbouring Australian village and hiding far apart in the woods while the other person would try and find them by using the walkie-talkie. Since we were quite young, however, we weren't allowed out of the house for very long, and so we had to be home by 5 p.m. We returned home later, about 6, and had our dinner. By this time, it was around 7 p.m. We decided we'd call it a night and packed all of our toys away and got ready for bed. However, we didn't pack the walkie-talkies away. Dale was staying in the spare room, and I had my own room. And so we planned to talk to each other through the walkie-talkies until we fell asleep. That's when we heard the thing that would change our lives forever. It was about 11 at night, and we had been telling ghost stories over the walkie-talkies for hours. All of a sudden, whilst Dale was telling me a story about a monster that supposedly haunts the same woods we had been in earlier, his voice was cut off and replaced with the usual static noise the walkie-talkie produced when the talker had accidentally let go of the button he used to speak. I waited for a few seconds for Dale to carry on speaking, and I heard a faint mumbling coming from the small speaker. That's odd, I thought. The speaker was still emitting static, but I could definitely hear some kind of movement in speech. All of a sudden, the sound of crying could be heard through the static. This was very creepy to me, and so I dived out of my bed and rushed to the room where Dale was staying in. He was sat bolt up, straight in bed, also listening to this walkie-talkie, which was emitting the same sounds, if not a second or so behind mine. The crying grew louder. "What is that?" Dale asked. "I thought you were playing a prank." When I told him I wasn't, his face dropped. He switched his off. The sound still emitted from the walkie-talkie I was holding in my hand, making it impossible for my walkie-talkie to be picking up sound from his. "This is creepy," said Dale. The crying and mumbling through the static seemed to get slightly clearer and louder. I switched mine off too and went back to bed. All kinds of ideas were flowing through my head. Perhaps I was picking up one of the sounds of afterlife. Perhaps my walkie-talkie was simply broken and producing weird sounds that just sounded like crying and mumbling. I tried not to think anything of it and went to sleep. I awoke in the next day by a massive bang which seemed to be coming from downstairs. It was around 6 in the morning, and I rushed downstairs to find my mother and cousin Dale looking out of the living room in our neighbour's house next door. A large police van had pulled up outside, and our neighbour, Jessie, was being led outside by several officers. She was screaming profanities and insults, and even tried to run from the officers at one point, before being pushed into the back of a van and handcuffed. We were shocked by what had happened, and generally confused. Jessie had been our new neighbour, recently moving into the house next door with her baby after our old neighbour had died from old age. She had kept herself to herself, and as far as we had known, she was very quiet, and didn't seem like the type of person that would be arrested for any reason. It was until the next day, when we received our daily newspaper, that we found out what had happened. Jessie had murdered her baby after apparently seeing some horrible apparitions of an elderly person in her house that had tormented her for weeks, and she had finally snapped and turned loopy. This wasn't the disturbing part though. The disturbing part was the fact that the baby monitor in the room the murder took place had been switched on during the murder, My cousin and I had everything.